Hello and welcome to Gallery Teachers Masterclass. My name is Sophie and I'm very happy, very excited to be with you today to present a session on dictation in the ESL Classroom. First, it's going to be a practical session. And the first type of dictation we're going to look at today is the opinion dictation. And that will give us the opportunity to discuss our views on dictation to see where we actually stand on dictation. Are we all for it? Do we have mixed feelings towards it? Then we will do a quick banana dictation. It's one of my all-time favorites, and that will enable us to look at the key aspects of dictation. Who dictates? Do we need to write down everything? So the main key aspects of dictation. Then we will do a letter dictation, and that will enable us to discuss the various purposes of dictation in the ESL classroom. Then we will talk about the infamous Dictogloss. You may have heard about it before, you may have tried it before, it could be one of your all-time favorites, but we'll talk about dictation and noticing. After that, we'll talk about a classic in the ESL classroom, the running dictation. And through that, we'll talk about how it enables us to increase the levels of learner engagement throughout the lesson, and also at which point of the lesson this could come in handy. We'll then talk about the whisper and the shouting dictation, and we'll look at how this helps us to manage our learner needs. Then we'll talk about the picture dictation for a bit of variety. And then we'll have a quick chat about technology dictation. And we'll have a look at how this helps in terms of pronunciation, but also in terms of note-taking for some students with maybe different needs. And finally, I'll share some useful links with you. So let's get started. The first dictation we're going to do today is the opinion dictation. Right. So I'd like you, if possible, to have a piece of paper and a pen at the ready. And if you could draw 3 lines, like you can see on the screen. The reason for this is I'm going to give you 3 statements about dictation. You do not need to write any words for now. You just need to place a cross on the line. If you disagree with this statement and think, no, Sophie, this is wrong, then you'll put the cross on the left-hand side of the line. But if you agree with it, then you will put your cross on the right-hand side. If you think, well, actually, I think it depends, then you may want to put your cross about halfway through on the line. Okay, but remember, for now, all you need to do is to listen and put down the cross. No writing for now. So the first statement is number 1. Dictation is old school. Dictation is old school. So think about it and place a cross accordingly. Number 2. The main purpose of dictation is to improve spelling. The main purpose of dictation is to improve spelling. So think whether you disagree with this or agree. Number 3. Dictation is more useful for lower than for higher level students. Again, dictation is more useful for lower than for higher level students. Okay, so by now you should have your 3 lines and your 3 crosses, 1 on each line. So now I'm going to read the statements one more time, and this time I would like you to listen carefully again and write down 1 or 2 keywords only. Okay, so for now, do not write the full statement, just 1 or 2 keywords. All right, so let's do the first one together. Dictation is old school. So maybe somewhere around the line, what do you think are the keywords you would write from this statement? So here I picked old school. Statement number 2. The main purpose of dictation is to improve spelling. Okay, so I think we have one definite keyword here, which is spelling. And statement number 3 is dictation is more useful for lower than for higher level learners. So again, what do you think are the 1 or 2 keywords in this statement. Your answer, your selection could be different from mine. I picked lower level. I picked low level. Okay, so again, if we were all in the same room, in the same classroom, I would say, okay, with your partner, work in pairs. From your keywords, can you rewrite the full statements? Okay, so I would give you maybe 1 minute per statement to do that. So I would probably give you a time limit of about 3 minutes. Okay, and you would get to do that as a collaborative task. And then we would check whether you got the statements right. Okay, so the first statement was dictation is old school. And then I would ask you in your groups to discuss your opinions. Where did you put your crosses and why? Did you agree with your partners or disagree? Can you come to a consensus? Number 2, the purpose of dictation is to improve spelling. So again, I would get you to rewrite the full statement, and then I would ask you to discuss whether you agreed or disagreed. Is this based on opinion? Is this based on your own personal experience as a learner? Is it based on your experience of dictation as a teacher? And for the third statement, dictation is more useful for lower than for higher level students. Again, I would get you to rewrite this full statement collaboratively and then discuss and share your opinions. Right. So what I'd like to do is we're not going to be able to discuss these statements right now, but during our live session, I really hope we get to share our opinions about those 3 main statements. All right. But this is the opinion dictation. I think it's a brilliant type of activity to get students to share opinions. And it kind of leads them up to it. It gives people time, gives students some time to think about the statement, to think about the language to phrase that statement, and then it gives them the opportunity to practice their speaking skill, to discuss and share their opinion with partners. It's a great activity to do at the start of the lesson to get your students engaged in the topic of your lesson. Or it could also be an interesting activity to do as a follow-up, a follow-up task, let's say, during a receptive skills lesson, or maybe during a speaking lesson. It could also be a nice introduction to a writing task, getting students to discuss their opinions before, let's say, writing an argumentative essay. So it's a very versatile task. It's engaging, and my experienced students really enjoy taking part in the opinion dictation. Now, here comes the next dictation, and this one is really playful. However, I think it works with a whole range of ages. It works really well with kids, but in my experience, it's worked really well with adults as well, even with much higher levels. All right, so I'm going to ask you some questions about dictation. And I would like you to listen and write down the questions. So again, if you have a piece of paper and a pen at the ready, that will be brilliant. Now, the trick is every time you hear the word banana, leave a space. Okay, and later we'll think about what the banana words might be. So let's do the first one as an example together. Number 1 is banana dictates, question mark. Banana dictates, question mark. So your students might think you've gone a little bit crazy, but as you keep going, they will start to see, okay, I think I know what the banana word might be. Okay, question number 2, let's go. Who banana the text? Question mark. Who banana the text? Question mark. And again, I'll show you what I've got here. Okay, question number 3 is, how banana should the text be? Question mark. How banana should the text be? Question mark. Number 4. How should the banana dictating sound? Question mark. How should the banana dictating sound? Question mark. So don't worry, I haven't gone crazy yet. We'll discuss all these banana words in a second. Number 5. Must the listener write down banana? Must the listener write down banana? Question mark. And the last one, number 6. Who corrects the banana? Good question. Who corrects the banana? question mark. And it looks like this. All right. So again, if we were all in the same room all together discussing dictation, now I would get you to work in groups, possibly 3 students maybe together, 3 people working together. And I would ask you to decide, what do you think those banana words might be? All right. So let's see. Do you have any ideas for number 1? What is the banana word? It is who dictates. And I think it's a good question to ask. Traditionally, well, it's a classic. The teacher dictates. And I think people from my generation, anyway, that's probably how we experience dictation as a very teacher-centered and teacher-led activity. But does it have to be the teacher? Well, no. And very often, if you go through course books or different types of supplementary materials, you will see that the notes encourage the teachers to get the students to work in pairs and dictate to one another. Right? So a lot of dictation activities we're going to talk about today can also be done in pairs where the students get to dictate for one another. We could also use a recording. Why not? It could also be a recording, okay, from a video or just from audio. Okay, question number 2. Who banana the text? So let's see. What is the banana word? It is who chooses the text. And again, traditionally, well, it's a no-brainer. It's the teacher, right? But depending on who you teach, whether you teach young learners or teenagers or adults, you might find that sometimes it can be quite interesting to actually encourage students to bring in different texts that they think would be fun to work with in class. At the end of the day, you will make the decision as to whether a text is suitable for dictation purposes or not. But in my experience, I find, especially with teenagers, it's quite validating for them to feel like they've got a bit of agency. Oh, I get to pick the text for my English class. So it becomes a bit more motivating. Number 3, how banana should the text be? So here you may have got different ideas, how easy, how difficult, or how long should the text be? And it's always a good question to ask yourself, even with experience, how long should your text be? And I think a very, very, very rough guideline would be, if you look at the texts used in the course books for the level you're teaching, if you look at how long the texts are in the text-based grammar presentation, so very often grammar will be presented through a text. If you look at how long that text is, it'll give you a rough idea as to how long your text should be for dictation. But if you're teaching complete beginners, could your text be 1 word? Why not? You could have a running dictation where students run out, read 1 word, come back and dictate it. And it could be types of food, or it could be jobs, it could be colors, it could be days of the week, etc. Right? So it can go from word level to text level, especially if you're teaching higher levels for a Dictogloss, for example. So again, there's a whole range of length that would be suitable for your text, always based on your students' needs and what the specific aim for your dictation is. Is it to review vocabulary for your beginners, in which case short sentences or word level will do, or is it to look at sentence structure or paragraph structure with your advanced students, in which case you could look at a longer piece of writing. All right, number 4, how should the banana dictating sound? And here the banana word is voice. Okay, and again, if you think back to your experience of dictation, if you did it as a child at school, I certainly did. I grew up in France, and dictation is a classic in France. There's a national competition, it's on TV. Dictation is a big, big thing. And it was always the same. The voice dictating always spoke slowly and clearly, right? But if you think, well, actually, I would like to use dictation to help my students develop their listening skills. Well, in real life, nobody speaks the way those traditional voices would sound for dictation, right? People don't slow down and then repeat what they've said several times, right? So you might find that at times it's okay if the voice dictating is natural, speaks at normal speed. Okay. We'll have a chat later about the whisper dictation and when it's suitable. Likewise, we'll have a look at the shouting dictation and decide when it's suitable. Okay. And this is connected to question number 5. Must the listener write down everything? Well, again, if you dictate very slowly and very clearly, you probably have it in your head that you want your students to write on every single word, right? But if you go back to our opinion dictation, did you have to write on everything? No. And I asked you to write 1 or 2 keywords, and then I asked you to reconstruct the statements with your imaginary partners in our imaginary room. So again, in some types of dictation, yes, the listeners will have to write down everything, but not necessary. And this is where I think dictation becomes maybe a bit more modern, maybe slightly less old school, and where we really work on listening skills more, right? We know that a lot of our students find listening very difficult and potentially demotivating because they feel like they have to understand every single word, and they find it really hard to let go. Like, they find it really hard to be satisfied from just being able to understand the keywords. They want to get every single word. If your students are a bit like that, using a text where you read at normal speed and they just have to write down keywords, that will encourage them to let go of that need to understand every single word, right? And for number 6, who corrects the banana? Who corrects the dictation? Again, traditionally, it's the teacher. But if that's your experience whenever you were at school, if you did dictations and then your teacher took them home and corrected them and handed them back to you, think for a second, what did you do with the corrected dictation? Did you go through it carefully and really think about the mistakes you'd made and maybe practice them several times? Or you just say, yeah, thank you, teacher, and they just end up at the very, very bottom of your school bag? Right. So again, bear in mind that if you correct your students' dictations, they may not really notice what mistakes they'd make, and there may not be that much learning to come out of it. So if it's a test, fair enough. But if it's really just to them to practice and develop skills, then maybe they should correct their own dictation. Maybe if you trust them to do so, they could correct each other's dictation, because then the idea is really for the penny to drop and for students to go, right, I keep spelling that word wrong, or I keep forgetting to use that preposition in my sentences. I really need to make sure that I work on that. All right. Again, if you have any questions throughout this session, please write them down, and we'll get to talk about all those questions whenever we have our live Q&A session. All right. Now, let's move on to our next type of dictation. It's the letter dictation. And for this, again, piece of paper and a pen, I'm going to dictate a question letter by letter. Okay, I'm not going to tell you where the words start and where they end. You'll work that out afterwards. So first, number 1, just listen and write down all the letters. So let's go. W, H, A, T, I, S, T, H, E, P, O, I, N, T, question mark. So what is our question? Again, if we're in the same room, I would probably say it again. I would give you time in pairs, maybe to check that you got the same letters and to try to identify what the words are in the question. All right. But our question for today is, what is the point? Okay, so what's the point of dictation, right? So let's see. Well, as we said, yes, it can be spelling. And traditionally, if we look at the more classic type of dictation, a lot of the time, the main purpose is to improve spelling. Dictation is a brilliant tool to use when you're teaching literacy. It's really, really useful. But again, and this is something that I feel really strongly about because I've seen it go wrong so many times, even today in schools. My son does dictation every week and he hates dictation, which breaks my heart. And when I look at his dictation, I think, I know why he hates it. The sentences are completely irrelevant. So it could be something like, Marcus goes fishing every weekend. There's no Marcus in his class. So again, if you're using dictation in the more classical sense of the term and you really look at spelling, fine, no problem. But please make sure that your sentences are meaningful and personalized and relevant to your learners' lives and to your learners' needs. But yes, it can be used to improve spelling. It can also be used to improve and develop listening skills, right? And dictation is absolutely brilliant. Like we said earlier on, if your students get caught up and they want to understand every single word, and you do dictation where you read the text at normal speed, or you use a recording and they just have to write down keywords, that will help them develop their listening skills, especially when it comes to gist or scanning for keywords. It's also a brilliant tool to help your students practice their pronunciation. Because especially if they're dictating to one another and maybe they come from different language backgrounds, so their accents are different, they really have to work really hard to pronounce the words clearly, carefully, so that their partner can understand them. Right, now this picture I think is probably the most important one. Dictation can be used for spelling, yes, but it can really be used at a much higher level of, let's say, cognitive engagement, right? And what I mean by that is dictation can be quite a hard thing for students to do, especially when they've maybe just written down a couple of keywords and they have to rewrite a sentence or they have to rewrite a text. Okay, because then they have to think and use every bit of language they've ever learned. They have to think about grammar. They have to think about vocabulary. They have to think about discourse, and they have to try to put everything together. And Scott Thornbury, for example, has written an awful lot about this aspect, and he calls it noticing. It's really for students to go, oh, right. Okay, so this is when you use the past perfect, right? I don't know about you, but in my experience, I've taught the past perfect at pre-int level. I don't know how many times. Students just don't use it. You do the lesson, they get it, they do their controlled practice, freer practice, no problem. But after the lesson, there's no past perfect. But let's say if you use a Dictogloss activity, which we'll look at in a minute, it might be when the students go, I used the past simple, but in the original text, they used the past perfect. Okay, now I think I get it. I know why. And that will help students to notice the gap between their level of language and the level they're hoping to achieve. So it's really for them to notice the gap between their own English and the level they're hoping to get to. All right. Another purpose of dictation is to encourage peer learning. Okay, a lot of dictations work brilliantly in pairs or groups. Small groups or pairs work really well for dictation. So again, it's one way to encourage the students to really come together and help one another. And subsequently, it's one way to encourage more learner autonomy, especially if the students are dictating to one another, they're not relying on you quite as much. So it's one way for the students to become that bit more independent, and students usually enjoy that. So now, Dictogloss, and this is my personal all-time favorite. For me, it is the king of all dictations, right? So what is Dictogloss? I'm sure most of you are already aware of it, but just a quick summary. Right. So Dictogloss is a classroom activity where your learners are required, they're asked to reconstruct a text. How do they do that? Well, first of all, the teacher or a recording, it depends if you're dictating yourself or if you use a recording, both are absolutely fine. But the learners listen to the text First of all, for comprehension. So you could set a gist task or a scanning task, or it could be a prediction task as well, to make sure that the students actually understand what the text is about. Right? There's no point in having the students write down a text that, or reconstruct the text that they did not understand in the first place. So comprehension goes first. Once you've checked that the students have understood the text, then you can read it again, normal speed, or you can use the recording again. The students just listen carefully and write down keywords, a bit like we did for the opinion dictation, right? Once they've done that, they get together in pairs and they have to compare their notes, right? As they compare their notes in pairs, you can monitor and you can gauge, right, okay, I think they've got enough. I think they could reconstruct the text, or, wow, okay, they need to hear it one more time. So again, you read the text one more time and they write down more keywords, compare their notes. And usually you'll do that at least twice. If it's a particularly challenging text, you can maybe do that 3 times. But it's through your own monitoring that you can gauge when the students have enough to start reconstructing the text. Once they have compared their notes and you think they have enough, then again, in small groups or in pairs, you'll give them some time to rewrite the text. Now, I think at this stage, this is when you have the students go, oh, no, it's too difficult. No. And you have to reassure your students, their version is not going to be identical to the original. And in a way, that's the whole point, right? The point will be for them to compare their own reconstruction of the text with the original and ask themselves that really important question. Is my version different but okay? Or is my version different but actually, no, that's not accurate. I need to get that right. I need to work on that more. All right. That rewriting stage is really quite difficult for students because, again, we're talking about cognitive engagement. Whenever you're monitoring a Dictogloss, this is when you should hear the brains at work. You should hear all those brain cogs working, because this is when students really have to pull all their knowledge. They have to activate all that passive knowledge they may have accumulated and ask themselves, what's the preposition? What is the tense? Right? The key thing to bear in mind, I think, when you're picking the text for your Dictogloss is you need to have a specific language focus in mind. Right? So you could pick a Dictogloss, you think, oh, that text is brilliant. It's really interesting. My students are going to love it. It's about their favorite pop star, or, it's a brilliant text and they're really going to enjoy it. Yes, and that's great. But also, can you extract any specific aspects of language that you feel your students need to work on? So I'll show you an example from a course book that I use with teenagers. And here we've got the text on the right-hand side on endangered animals, right? And whenever I pick that text, I use this with my A1 students, so they're beginners, right? But again, teaching here, students have a range of levels. So their listening is probably very decent A2, but their writing is much lower. So again, whenever I pick this text, I just thought, well, they're going to find it interesting. They love talking about animals and the natural world, and they all come from very different parts of the world, and they've got different wild animals in their home countries. And I thought, well, with that text, we'll be able to look at positive sentences in the present simple. I wasn't even thinking about negatives or questions at this point, right? And I thought, well, actually, I've noticed their syntax is all over the place, because I think maybe in their home languages, syntax is possibly a lot more flexible than it would be in English. I thought, well, it'd be a good way for us to start looking at subject, verb, object, and they should be able to start color coding those whenever they compare their text with the original, and that will be useful. I could also use that text to practice their is versus their are, and it could also be vocab, right? So here I thought, well, we can work on the vocabulary of animals, colors, food, countries, nationalities, etc. So again, I thought this text was useful. My own priority for this particular lesson was actually the subject, verb, object, because I just found, most students didn't really follow that structure, and frankly didn't really use verbs at that stage. So that's the specific language focus that I used. All right, now let's look at how we can stage a Dictogloss. Again, this is a suggested procedure, but you may decide to change a few things based on your own class and on your own learners. So let's see. So again, whenever I stage a Dictogloss, I was thinking about my lesson about the endangered animals. So this is really an example. So I would do a quick lead in. It could be a kind of A to Z of animals. Again, I was thinking, well, this session's about dictation. So for context, I could use a picture dictation. I've got 3 animals. We've got the gorilla, the panda, and the tiger. So I could give student A a picture of the gorilla, student B the picture of the panda, and student C a picture of the tiger, and they would have to describe their animal to each other, right? Then I would do a prediction task, or it could be a gist task. It could be a kind of scanning task of what animals do they hear about. But again, the idea is make sure that students have understood the text before you start looking at the language. Right, so in terms of staging the Dictogloss, we do the listening first. Students listen and they take notes. Then they write together, but they're also using their speaking because they have to negotiate how they're going to reconstruct the text together. And the key stage here is the noticing. It's whenever you give them the original text and they get to compare their version with the original. This is a really hard thing to do for students in my experience, and you need, as the teacher, to guide them. So give them very specific aspects of language to compare. So it could be, okay, I want you to underline all the verbs in your text, and I want you to underline all the verbs in the original. And check, did you use the same tenses? And if not, why not? Okay. And after that, you can talk about and do more clarification of language for specific aspects that the students found particularly difficult. And that will naturally lead on to more practice of the language through your controlled and your freer practice. In my experience, Dictogloss take a long time. They often take longer than you think, but that's okay. It's not a particularly fun lesson. It's not about students laughing and really having a brilliant time, but there's something quite satisfying as a teacher when you see your students leaving your classroom looking tired, because you know they've worked really, really hard, right? So it's really positive. It's a really positive dictation activity to use. Now here is an all-time ESL or EFL classic, and I'm sure that most of you already use the running dictation. It's such a classic that I'm not actually going to go through how to stage it, because I would imagine most of you know how to do that. However, if you want to talk about how to stage the running dictation, please make a note and we'll discuss that together during our live Q&A. But for me, really, the running dictation is something that I'll use whenever I see my students like this. And that's often after lunch, right? No interest, tired. And really, I want to bring them from that level of engagement to this level of engagement, right? And that's something that I've been using here in different schools as well. So this is a picture of my students in a secondary school here in Belfast. And I put the sentences outside the classroom. And the students were so lethargic after lunch. They just, Miss, no, not today. We just want to go on YouTube. We don't want to do any work. And the running dictation is really what helped bring them up from that lethargic stage to that more engaged stage. And it worked really well. They worked really hard because it was competitive, right? I find that students like to do this task well, because to win the running dictation, the writer has to write everything very accurately. It's very important that the runners are not allowed to write. Okay. And I run running dictation Olympics. They always get, gold medal, silver, and bronze. And if they've got the bronze, they'll definitely want to do it again to get silver. And if they get silver, they'll want it again to get gold. So again, running dictation is a really useful activity to use if you feel, oh my God, I've lost them. My students have gone all quiet. They're not engaged anymore. That's one way to re-inject energy into your lesson. Now, I don't know about you, but I've taught groups where my students were really quiet, incredibly quiet and really didn't say much. They were very shy and just found speaking very difficult, and they felt really on the spot and very pressured. So for those students, well, you can use a shouting dictation, right? It's great if they're quiet, if they're shy. It's a brilliant tool for the students to practice their pronunciation, because if you shout, let's say, you've got a student at one end of the room and the other student is at the other end, and it's pair work, so they have to dictate to one another. They have to shout, but it has to be clear. So they must enunciate as clearly as possible. And it's really one way for them to work on very specific sounds. Very often you'll find that those work really well for gap fills, and you'll find them at the back of teachers' books where you get all the supplementary material. So if you find an A, B gap fill, you might ask yourself, this could work as a dictation, as a pair dictation, right? The idea is that at some point they'll get to swap roles. And if you think that they're still being too quiet, you can crank up the volume. You can play music and turn it up, 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 up until they really have to shout. Okay. Again, it's engaging because it's not what students expect from a very traditional English lesson, but it's engaging, it's fun, and there's great value in it. It's really great for their confidence and for their pronunciation. Likewise, you may have had groups where your main classroom management challenge was to get the students to get quiet. Some groups are just loud, right? And maybe they're groups of teenagers, or it really depends. But some groups are just really loud. And in that case, you could get them to do the whisper dictation. So again, it's a great way to bring the energy levels down. They really have to listen extremely carefully to one another. So if you find that your students, when they work in pairs or groups, just don't listen, they don't pay attention to one another, that's a really useful tool to use as well. It's also brilliant for pronunciation because, again, they need to enunciate very, very clearly. Same procedure as for the shouting dictation, and again, they'll swap roles. Okay, potential extension activities, pronunciation whispers. Okay, and again, that's a fun activity. You could use that at the start of your lesson. It could be at, let's say to introduce your free practice or to introduce a follow-up activity. It could be as a filler, maybe at the end of class if you've got 10 minutes left and you've already done your review for the lesson. Right, here's another variation on the classic type of dictation. It's the picture dictation. So the idea is, again, it works in pairs. One person has a picture that they have to keep secret. They have to describe it to their partner, who has to listen really carefully and not write this time. They have to draw. So it's a describe and draw kind of game. The reason why I love picture dictation so much is that it'll work for beginners if you're looking at basic shapes. So it'll work with really young learners as well, right? If you're looking at triangles, star, circles, it's really useful for very low levels or very young learners. But with your advanced students, it could be a kind of still life, right? So it could be a picture from a magazine, it could be a painting. And this gets really tricky. So I think the idea even with the higher levels still find picture dictation difficult. So you really have to think at the planning stage, how much scaffolding will your students need? And it could be a way of giving them that grid. And you can look at the language first, in the background, in the foreground, on the left hand and the right hand side, just to give them all the language to develop that kind of space vocabulary, spatial awareness kind of vocabulary. So that can work in pairs. It can also work where you have the picture stuck on the back of a student and you have the rest of the class describing to a student who then has to draw on the board. Okay, so again, it's engaging and you can pick the picture based on the vocabulary you're hoping to have the students practice. So again, so describe and draw, it's brilliant for vocabulary review. It's often used to describe rooms in the house. So it's often used to practice furniture vocabulary as well as prepositions of place. So it's next to, it's behind, it's in front of, it's beside, it's above, it's below. Again, it's useful there is and there are for your lower levels. Another reason why I love this so much is that that's something that really works well for all types of pair dictations, actually, whether it's running dictation, shouting, or the whisper dictation. It really lends itself to clarification language because the students can't say to, what? I don't understand. They need to have the language to say, can you say that again? Or can I just check one thing? Or did you say this or that? Did you mean this or that? So it's a really useful way to teach that bit of functional language to help the students clarify when they're not sure they've understood something. Right. Nowadays, we use our technology more and more. We've got our smartphones, we've got our tablets and our laptops and everything, and it's great. And you'll find that more often, you'll see that little icon, right? And that's the dictate button. So I thought, well, can't we do set on dictation without mentioning this? However, it's dictation, but really I think about it as more as a kind of note taking, right? So this is the first picture there, I think is from a Google Doc. The second picture is from a Word document. So you'll see that little icon, okay? Now, I think this is useful for different reasons. If you've got students who are not comfortable writing, maybe they're dyslexic and maybe at times it'd be useful for them to actually practice writing. Maybe sometimes you want them to be able to navigate the lesson with a bit more ease, in which case it's fine to let them just dictate. Okay, so they'll dictate and then the computer will type it up for them. However, you need to make sure that your student's pronunciation is good enough because it needs to be very intelligible, right? Those types of software, they will be able to pick up different accents. Although in my experience, I've tried it with people here in Belfast who've got very strong Belfast accents, and it wasn't 100% accurate. It could be very demotivating for your students if they try to dictate and the computer just did not understand them. So make sure that in terms of note taking, they're ready. Likewise, if you want your students to practice their pronunciation, it's maybe a challenge they can do, let's say, at home for homework to say, okay, I think you're ready for this. Try it at home. Try to dictate those 2 sentences and see how it goes. So it's one way for students to self-assess how clear their pronunciation is. So it can be useful and quite motivating as well. You can get the students to, when they're dictating to one another, obviously they can write their notebooks. They could also maybe use their smartphone, right? If they prefer to type. That's entirely up to you, and you'll know your students best for this. Here are some useful links and websites. Please refer to the Gallery Teachers workshops. There's a huge library of past workshops, brilliant resources, really useful articles to read as well. So I hope you found this session useful, and I look forward to hearing all your questions and your comments. And I just hope that if at the start of the lesson you wholeheartedly agreed that dictation was old school, I hope that by now you might be able to slide that cross down to the I disagree side. But look, we'll get to talk about this together. Dictation sometimes today still has a bad reputation. Why is that? Well, you might think that, dictation is this real boring, old school activity. I did it at school and I hated it. I had to dictate full sentences and I did not enjoy it, right? So dictation often has this bad reputation because it's something that we did at school and it really wasn't that enjoyable. And let's face it, we never really saw the value in it. However, dictation can be a lot more than this, right? Its sole purpose is not to improve spelling. Dictation is something we can use when we teach literacy, but it can also be used for a whole range of different purposes, such as developing listening skills, encourage our students to work together, so to develop peer learning, to encourage students and learner autonomy. And dictation is also a brilliant tool if you want to encourage your students to notice the gap between their level of English and the level that they're hoping to achieve. It's a very practical way for your students to go, right? So if I want to move to the next level, I really need to work on my tenses, or I really need to work on my sentence structure. So it's a really brilliant way for students to be involved in their own learning and to become more aware of where they're at, what their strengths are, and what they still need to work on to be able to get to the next level. Dictation often has a bad reputation because we will have that, well, a lot of us did dictation at school and the sentences were seemed anyway completely random. And that's why I think a lot of people think, it's a really boring activity. But dictation can still be a very meaningful task. It can be very personalized and very experiential. So hopefully I'll be able to convince you that dictation is not such an old school classroom activity after all. There are many benefits to using dictation in the ESL classroom. First of all, dictation can be a very student-centered activity. It doesn't have to be teacher-centered or teacher-led. It's really great for students who maybe are a little bit shy, or it's also really good for students who are a bit more confident. So it's a great way for students to come together and share their strength and work collaboratively. Dictation can be very engaging. I mean, running dictations can really help pick up the pace in a lesson and get students who maybe after lunch are maybe tired and not so motivated to get them engaged and communicating together in the classroom. So it's dynamic, it's engaging, and it can be fun. But on top of that, there are also benefits in terms of your students' cognitive engagement. Dictation, especially Dictogloss type activities, require the students to reconstruct a text. And for them to be able to do that, they have to pull everything they've ever learned, whether it's grammar, vocabulary, discourse. It's an activity where they get to practice their listening skill, their speaking skill, because they have to rewrite the text collaboratively, and also get to practice their writing skills. So dictation can be multi-skill and multi-system. It's fun, it's engaging, and it's got brilliant inherent value in it in terms of your students' learning.